Hello, my name is Fraser Simons. This is my channel, Springboard Thought. Today I'm doing the top books of the year for me. This is every single 5-star review published in 2021. And I'll have a separate video for my favorite books of the year that were not published. So that way I can get a nice little group of each of them. First up is, and we're proceeding chronologically, this was published in January, but I consumed it months later. This is the memoir of Gabriel Byrne, who is a fairly famous actor, though maybe B-list now, I'm not sure. He's famous for a lot of like 80s, 90s movies, In Treatment on HBO, Stigmata, but this focuses a lot on his home life. It's not particularly enamored with a linearly chronicled depiction of like his career, which I'm glad that that's the case. There is an emphasis on his stage work, which is the thing I didn't know much about. And so this was pretty much everything that I wanted out of the book. It's well written, it's lyrical, it's honest, authentic, and there's a through line throughout it and a non-linear progression for events that is so well executed that it feels like it knows exactly when to touch on maybe a heavy subject, but then duck away and then come back to it later to kind of let the reader like stew in it, refresh themselves, and make it all cohesive and great. And of course on audiobook, it's fantastic. He narrates it himself. He's an actor that's stage trained. It's everything, right? Next is Detransition Baby. This was something I consumed on audio. It touched on very like interesting dynamics between trans people and a straight woman, and the situations that arise for them, as well as the flashbacks, I guess you could say, to the main character's past and why they detransitioned. Was really fantastic. There was a lot of stuff that I just wasn't privy to. I thought it really was eye-opening. It felt non-judgmental but critical of the characters. Next is Nishka, which I have a full review out on, and I would highly recommend that you check it out. It is so fantastic. It's probably the most moving, interesting, unconventional piece of literature that I've consumed this year. But it's a mixed media presentation that kind of feels like going through a gallery presentation of Jordan Abel's life growing up as somebody who's disconnected from his indigenous roots and community, finding his indigeneity in other modes, specifically colonial writings, and decolonizing them. There's his own poetry in it. There's the colonial stuff. There's his father's artwork in it. And there's this interplay between all of it that goes on with a speech that he gives, I think 3 speeches interspersed, with time codes, which kind of makes it present as poetry as well. I don't know how much it is available outside of Canada or the US, but hopefully it has some far-reaching properties to it. Too often Canadian books are siloed here, so I hope this makes it out. Next is the final revival of Opal and Nev. This was fantastic for me and stands out in my mind because like a lot of other people, I really liked Daisy Jones and the Six because it was surprising and subversive of the genre and a unique oral history presentation to me anyway. This takes that and goes one step further, and it is a fictional accounting of a black woman from, I can't remember, and a British dude who is kind of like Bob Dylan-ish, it seems like, forming this group and becoming a sensation that never was, but using their dynamics to confront industry issues rather than completely glamorize that era as a lot of books do, and use the platform for solely the sort of like romantic relationship that may or may not be happening in a similar way that all of these books tend to do, it seems. It just feels a lot more realistic, trying to communicate real world things about the industry through this fictional vehicle. The writing is fantastic. There's a strange structure that emerges in which it ends up being the band member for the group was killed at a riot at a concert that they held, and the daughter of that person is a journalist who assembled this, and she is the main sort of narrator that is putting this all together, but also has a stake in it as well. So she has her own chapters, and then we have the compartmentalized fictional journal entry stuff that would have been, but becomes an oral history instead. The audiobook is very well narrated. I read this twice, both on ebook and on audiobook. Both are exceptional, but the audiobook does have a full cast for everybody, and so it's quite phenomenal. Next is The Paper Palace. This is a book that seems pretty polarizing, oddly. I really liked that it centered an older woman who was pictured as still like sexually desirable, an interesting character, and it starts off with a bang with her cheating on her husband with her best friend from the past, and then being shot into that past, experiencing what she experienced in a linear fashion, if I recall correctly. And what happened to them? Why is she with the husband if she's clearly in love with this guy? And I just felt really propulsive. The prose and the flow were exceptional, and I really gravitated and identified with the characters. Anytime there's like a central secret that is being kept by the characters, or any characters at all, and it sort of like unspools and unravels them or changes them in some fundamental manner, that's like sort of my catnip. So like Secret History, Goldfinch, a ton of French books, stuff like that. This is something similar, but in a contemporary manner, I guess. And it really stuck with me and feels like a book that I would like to revisit. Next is The Listeners. This was a Giller Prize book that I consumed before. I think it was even listed on the Giller Prize. I'm not sure, but possibly anyway. And this book was sort of destined to make it here because it is about a woman in a community who starts hearing a hum that nobody else ostensibly does. She's a teacher. She has a student that also starts hearing it, and they form a bond that is essentially viewed as inappropriate. And the hum sort of takes over her life. She ends up meeting a community of people that's kind of like AA meetings, you could say, who also hear the hum. And it's from that perspective that we start getting like a multitude of variables for what this hum could be, what its function is. There's some spiritualism, there's some scientific stuff, but mostly the depiction of the characters was just incredibly astute and perfect for me. You can point out each person like you know these people, you've met them before in other situations. So there's like a immediate understanding of these people and their interplay, and then the shared camaraderie of this secret again that they have, or not so secret eventually, and what it does to their lives is just incredible. And then also, when the municipal building here in town was being made, I started hearing a hum and started thinking I was going, a little wild and needed to go to the doctor or something like that. So I was always sort of predisposed to identifying with this story, and the same thoughts and feelings that they have about the hum were somewhat shared by me. So next is The Passage North by Anuk Arudpragasam, and this was so good. This is interiority at its best, I think. The prose are flowing, the descriptions vivid, specificity is excellent. It is definitely sort of like a masculine story, I think, but it is about a mysterious kind of death that occurs around a family member, and he has to essentially go on a train to go there. And that's basically the plot. Most of it is him reflecting on the death of the person, and it's all, like I said, an interior story for the most part. We learn about his past, we learn about the country, and it's sort of how it formed him and his interactions with it and his relationship to it, which parallels his relationship to somebody else that he cares for and has heard from again in an email, sort of dredging up the past. And so it feels like it, I don't know, doesn't have that much going for it, but it was just an incredible reading experience. And unlike other people, maybe because I consumed it on an audiobook, it never had a point where it was slow for me. It was incredibly enrapturing. I'm pretty sure that I started it in the morning and then I just completed it that day. Next is Nightbitch by Rachel Yoder. I am very much hoping to get this in a physical copy, but the narration for the audiobook, again, was quite good. I often get new releases on audiobook before physical just because I live in a small town and we have like 5 copies available versus the library system that I'm connected to in Calgary has like 1 billion more copies. So it ends up just going that way. But this is about a woman who gives birth, and it ends up being a not catastrophic event, but something that subsumes her completely. Her identity is pushed to the side. She has to reorganize her life and feels like her reorganization is, of course, more so happening than her husband, who is the breadwinner. So he just goes out, comes to work, and it's more or less similar, the same kind of thing for him, whereas she is sacrificing so much and she begins to experience a change into a feral beast dog, Nightbitch, which kind of sounds like a superhero name, but it's not. And I just thought this was, again, really astute. It wasn't afraid to confront the taboo subject matter of what motherhood does to women, what it asks of them, and what it doesn't ask of men, and sort of what that loss of agency and reclaiming it could look like when literalized. And sort of, you know, the feral nature, the wanderlust, the young humanity of a woman who transitions into motherhood is lost, and what that can mean for identity. I thought it was really exceptional. It was actually quite funny at sometimes. It had some like dark humor moments. And it was just, again, had featured characters that were just really vivid and alive. It just feels very organic and natural. And the unhinged women genre, if anyone's been watching my videos, is something that I am very much into and hope to see more of this trend continue on. Next is another unhinged women story, Once There Were Wolves by Charlotte McConaghy. This was a book about a pair of twins who, thank God, were not like fetishized or featured in any other sort of default perspective that I'm so sick of as a twin myself. They go through a really traumatic experience. Both of these women have been affected by domestic violence, and there's content warning for sexual assault in this. And they take on a project to go to Scotland, I believe it is, and introduce wolves to a population because deers are overrunning the island, and like the equilibrium of the place is being put off and stuff like that. Unexpected things start developing, of course, when you develop wolves into a habitat that they've not been habitualized to. And this again parallels the story of the twins and what their relationship to each other is, as well as the other men in the group, and just how they sort of navigate this very odd situation. It's cli-fi, it's dramatic, unhinged, feral. The prose were incredible. It flows very well. It is excellently paced. It knows when to dwell in certain moments and when to speed up. And it was just a kick to the teeth. Next is The Heart Principle by Helen Hoang. This was excellent and standout for maybe a strange reason. First of all, prefaces thing that I haven't read all that much romance, but I have read the previous 2 books in it, and this uses the previous 2 books to excellent effect. It's an awesome example of how to build on from the previous 2 works that you've made. It features a sort of main standout character that most people quite liked as a side character in the second book, I believe. Yeah, and then a new woman, and she is diagnosed later on in life with a form of neurodivergent diagnosis that she is grappling with at the same time as her mother has fallen ill, and all of these family demands are being placed on her. And then her douchey boyfriend guy wants to take a trial separation, sleep with other people, and insinuates that she won't be sleeping with other people because she doesn't even really like sex and all of this kind of stuff. And so she sort of accepts the challenge, I guess, and goes out with this guy who forms a weird kind of relationship with her that feels very organic and authentic in the way the other 2 didn't really feel that way to me, because they're both dealing with stuff in their life that's very personal, kind of taboo stuff that most people don't really touch on, but then trying to be there for each other in the hardest circumstances rather than a, magical first date, or, the obstacle just being her ex-boyfriend coming along later or something like that. I thought it was very surprising. The problems that the man faces especially, I thought was kind of transgressive and interesting and something I hadn't seen before. And then couple that with the issues that the woman was dealing with her family and trying to deal with her diagnosis, with her sort of new relationship to sex, and to her boyfriend, ex-boyfriend, whatever's going on with that. There was just a lot going on, and it felt like all of it mostly worked for me. Next is the Sally Rooney Beautiful World, Where Are You? I won't go too into this. I have a video that's just why I like to read Sally Rooney. So basically this book is, all of her writing just sort of makes me feel seen in a way that most other books don't. She's very non-judgmental. She feels like she's crafted a voice that is as curious about the characters as the person reading typically is. And she notices and notes down things that typically would be innocuous, but are very meaningful to the situation that most people would typically miss. And so you kind of can tell the way an interaction is going to go most of the time in a sort of like watching a train wreck kind of way. And it makes it really interesting to, reflect on these things and internalize them in a different way. And then this is also more expressly political. It feels more authentic to Rooney herself. And all of it worked for me, including the letters exchanged between the 2 women. All of the characters I felt like I knew quite well and felt quite distinct. And I just loved it. It was another 5-star read for me. Next is a kind of a funny pick, perhaps. This is Apples Never Fall by Liane Moriarty. This is about a woman who goes missing and a detective comes to figure out what's going on, and we get hurled into the past again, as so many of my favorite stories seem to be doing these days, to an event 6 months prior, if I'm correct, where all of this upset, I guess, happened with the family. A woman who suffered domestic violence shows up on their doorstep, insinuates herself into the home, not in a nefarious way. She's invited in and basically told to stay, but her very presence in the family upsets them. And then we go into the past of each and every family member, and we slowly unearth all of these different secrets that were being held, all the insecurities, and especially the craft work for the B plots of each and every one of those family members I found to be interesting and fascinating, and it always tied back both to the other B plots as well as the A plot. So it was just incredibly fun. It is really a great example of, I don't know, upmarket contemporary fiction doing what it does best, being like relatable but sort of appealing to you wanting to unearth family drama, but then also a murder mystery possibly. Like, is she murdered? Is she missing? What's going on with her? And then we get the perspectives of the detectives looking through the situations through their own lens, sort of tilting things like a prison and questioning whether you form the correct opinion as well. I thought it was great. Then I have The Man Who Died Twice, which is also another great example of a follow-up to the first book, The Thursday Murder Club. Without all of the setup having to be done, this got right to it. There's more murders, the murders are more interesting. The dynamics between all of the characters are so excellent. Their resolution to this one hinges on something that happens in the first one between two of the characters' relationship with each other, which I found to be very wholesome, endearing, and just sort of like incredible plotting. And it's an improvement in every way over The Thursday Murder Club, which I thought was great and gave 4 stars. Next is Dream of a Woman by Casey Plett. This was a Giller long-listed book that is a short story collection by a trans woman of trans women. There's a main, almost novella, I guess, that is a through line, and I hadn't seen that done in a short story collection before. It grounded everything. It made everything better for me, because if a short story didn't quite work, we were right back to that main narrative from egg to fully realized trans woman. They felt like they were authentic, like they were able to be themselves, even if that behavior that they were exhibiting was problematic in some ways. They didn't have to be monolithic. The challenge that they faced were very authentic and real world things, and not like, I don't know, super melodramatic or inventive. It was sort of everyday slice of life issues that they had to contend with, as well as processing their own identities and seeing what their identity shifts in their own relationships around them. And I thought it was very moving. Next is The Book of Form and Emptiness by Ruth Ozeki. This I read only a couple months ago, and I thought it was really interesting. I didn't know anything about this going in. It's about a young neurodivergent boy and his mother who is widowed at a early age. I think Benny's only like 10 or 11, something like that. Maybe a little bit older. And it's about them processing trauma, but at the same time, we also have 2 divergent storylines for each of the characters. Benny is somebody who has to kind of figure out what is quote-unquote real in his life and what matters to him and what the definition of real even means to him. He is starting to speak to inanimate objects and feels like it's a real interaction. And even as we go on, the book itself is present within the story and has its own chapters commenting on, in a meta sort of way, what is happening in the story, and varies from like a taunting attitude towards the reader to offering some fairly deep insights into different characters. It's a very strange book. Then we also have the mother's story, where she's just trying to hold it together. She's trying to work a job, provide the help for Benny that he needs, and kind of, again, her identity as a mother is subsumed. She doesn't have anything of her own. she's kind of spiraling, just like Benny is kind of spiraling, but they don't recognize that in each other in a heartbreaking kind of way. And then on top of it, her main obstacle is that people are questioning how good a mother she is, if she's a good provider, and it becomes a lot about institutions dictating the amount of agency that individuals have when they're not able to perform their specific role in a society. And then the last book is The Trees by Percival Everett. This book was incredible. And this is about, at least in the beginning, it presents itself as a murder mystery that occurs in the South of America. Two black men go to a small town because there has been a murder, and they're from the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation, the MBI. And they find that a white man has been killed, and across from him there is a corpse that is of a black man holding the ripped out testicles of the white man. And it becomes like a mystery right away, where it seems impossible that these circumstances could even happen. Like, did they die at the same time? What were the injuries that occur? And then on top of that, when the corpses are taken to be investigated, the black male corpse is disappeared. And so there's this like almost uncanny supernatural aspect to it as well. But then it also develops this satirical bent where it's making fun of events in the South while being very critical of it. It starts being about race relations and justice and a lot of other things. It's darkly comedic at some points. The dialogue between the partners is incredible. I think actually all of the dialogue in the book is just amazing, and I bet it's like 65 to 70% of this book. I have a whole video on this as well, so if you're interested, I would just urge you to check that out. And that's it. That's all of my 5-star reads of published books in 2021, and I'll be back with my list of books that'll probably be roughly the same amount for books that were published this year that were also my favorites, as well as the books that I did not like at all, the worst books, or more just like the strongest dislikes, I suppose. If you've read any of these books, I'd love to know what you thought of them. If you haven't picked up any of them, I'd be interested to know which ones you will pick up, and if by this taste, as established in this video, if you have any books you'd recommend for me in the future. Otherwise, I will speak to you next video. Bye.